Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Reset Podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Mignot. This is part of my 29 Days of Magic series where I interview an amazing Black woman every single day for 29 straight days. And today I am super excited to have Kamala Avila-Salmon, who is the CEO and founder of Kas Kas Productions. She has an incredible story, and I can't wait for you all to hear it. And this is our show. Hi, Kamala.
Hi, Laura. Thank you so much for having me. And I absolutely love the 29 Days of Magic. Such a great
Oh,
idea.
thank you so much. I'm so delighted to have you on. So, first question, always same. Answers, always amazing. I'm sure you'll be no different. So, Kamala, what was your first job?
So my very first job, so I'll give two. My first job that was unpaid was I worked at the Urban World Film Festival. And that was a job that I had over the summer when I was probably a junior, maybe even a sophomore in college. And it was this film festival that I heard about from like friends of friends that was Black owned, Black founded in New York, which is where I was from. And I went and I basically like learned a little bit about how festivals work, how submissions come in, how they seat the theater, like how they work with the filmmakers. And it's interesting because growing up, I really wanted to work in music primarily. And now I'm working in film. So in a way, it's sort of full sort of circle, thinking about how that experience connected to now what I'm doing now, which is similarly trying to elevate and support underrepresented filmmakers and storytellers.
And see, this is what happened. It's always amazing to me. Every time I do this, I ask this question, and literally, whatever job someone decides to like use as the example as their first job always correlates to what they're doing now.
Yeah.
It is there's something that sort of like pulls you into that very first job that all is the link to the rest of your career, and it's unbelievably fascinating. So cool. All right, so we start our urban world, and we're now here. So, what was the career journey like from there till now?
Yeah, that's a good question. And even what you said, like, I really agree with that insight. I always say that life often and your career often makes more sense in reverse than in play. Because when you're going through it, sometimes for me, like, I've had so many disparate career experiences through my career thus far. I've worked in music, I've worked in TV, I've worked in film, I've worked in tech, I've worked in marketing, creative, DEI, but there always was kind of a thread that held it all together. And it really was one, following my passion of really trying to uplift stories from underrepresented communities. Secondly, leading with and following my curiosity, always wanting to learn something new, always wanted to learn how the business behind the thing that is being consumed is working. So marketing was a really great entry point for that. So, after I graduated, I spent several years in marketing and music, just really learning how the business side takes these creative products and these creative artists and thinks about who the audience is for them, how can we reach them, how do we promote them, how do we help this artist reach their full potential? And that is very much still connected to what I do now. One of my first insights when I was early in my career was just seeing the way that like oftentimes artists of color, women, female artists, and later on LGBTQIA and people with disabilities would have these big visions for what they wanted to say, but oftentimes the business and the corporation would look at it as a small sort of niche opportunity to only reach audiences that were like them. So if something is centering a Black artist or a Black storyteller, it's only for Black audiences. If it's about a woman, then it's only for women, on and on and on. And that has been something that I've really always pushed back on throughout my career. Thinking about one, how do we, of course, serve underserved audiences, but how do we allow artists from underserved communities to have art that can be mainstream, to have art that can be broad? So, starting in music and then after business school, transitioning to the TV, film, and just content space, it's been a journey of continuing to hone that insight of wanting to elevate the voices of underrepresented storytellers and help them tell their stories on bigger and bigger stages. And then really wanting to deeply understand all the different forces and all the different decisions and processes that lead to that process of who gets a chance to tell their story on what stage, in what format, and with what promotion behind it. And so this current chapter that I'm in is my first time not only being a producer, but also being an entrepreneur. But it really is, again, taking all those threads from my career thus far and kind of putting them together. I was at Lionsgate prior to this for about 4 years, heading up the inclusive content team, where it was my job to really create the strategy for how the studio could build a more diverse and inclusive film slate. And I thought about it very holistically. What do we need to do on the development, acquisitions, and creative side? What do we need to do in green light in terms of what we're funding and how we're making those decisions? And then what do we need to do on the marketing side? So now as a producer, leveraging that experience and getting a chance to go even further upstream in the content creation or life cycle of really identifying at an early stage the scripts, the storytellers, the writers, the directors that want to tell those stories, and getting a chance to really help them shape those stories for the marketplace and think about how we can tell stories that continue to center underrepresented voices and communities, but continue to aspire to be stories that can be for all audiences, that can be for broad audiences.
That's an amazing career. Oh my God. This is
Thank
like,
you.
oh my God. Oh my God, there's so much there. Well, I knew you were awesome. So this is not surprising, but oh my God, let's pick this apart. So in this universe that we're in right now, we're
Yeah.
telling more diverse stories. Why is it so important that folks fully understand why you need to hear our stories?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there are multiple answers, but there's one that is always given, and I'll start there, but also talk about why I think it's not sufficient. So, one of the reasons that is often offered is that like representation matters. And the idea that like seeing people that look like you on screen does a lot of heavy lifting to humanize you and to make you feel like you are part of the world and to make other people feel like you are part of the world. And that is important. But I would say it's not the sufficient reason to invest in and care about making this content, because that often serves the purpose of sort of highlighting this narrative that I talked about before, which is this idea that like we only make things that center Black people so that Black people can be seen because Black people want to be seen. That is an important reason, but that's not the only reason. We make things that center Black people because Black people are people and they deserve to be centered just like anybody else. We make
Bingo.
things, right? We make things about Black people because other people need to see Black people. It is important that people who are not Black can see Black-centered stories that are about all different things, that are about hope, triumph, not just about trauma and history. Black people are still amazing today. You know, we are still doing things today. It doesn't always have to be a biopic. But then also, like, Black people and Asian people and queer people and women need to be in action movies and in horror movies and in comedies and living their everyday life. That is important for all audiences to see because it reminds people that one, the world is bigger than just them, but also gives them an opportunity to start seeing commonalities and similarities, which is what I think stories can do. I was just at a conference this weekend where we talked about all the research that exists that shows that the way that people absorb stories is different than the way that they absorb information generally. A lot of times when people are absorbing information, whether it's they're reading a book, like a more academic or nonfiction book, or they are listening to a lecture, or they're watching the news or whatever it is, they're often listening to it from a posture of like confirmation bias only. I know what I think, and I'm looking for reinforcement of that perspective. When people hear a compelling story about characters that are living in an exciting world, they let some of that guard down and their heart is open and their brain is open in a different way. They actually are taking in information in a much less judgmental, a much less confirmation bias only type of way. And that is why stories like and shows like Will and Grace did a huge amount of heavy lifting for the acceptance of and the visibility of LGBTQI people in our country, in particular, in that case, gay people in our country, right? We had never seen that before. Shows like
Being
a
regular
different,
people. Right.
right? You know, like a different world, like showing that like there were like this group of young Black progressive students that were doing all the things that people in college do, but centering us and centering that fictional HBCU had a huge increase in interest in HBCU enrollment for Black people at that time. Shows like Grey's Anatomy do a lot to sort of inspire new generations to be interested in surgery and different types of seeing different types of people as doctors. Like I was talking to someone who was saying that both he and his wife, a Black couple who have worked in marketing throughout their careers, their first entry point to even knowing it existed was a movie like Boomerang. Boomerang is not a message movie, but it inspired a
Oh,
generation
they're
of
advertising
marketers,
people.
right? That in
Yeah.
a career that they didn't know. So there's so many reasons why this content is important. And it's not just because like you need to feel seen.
It's so true. I think about storytelling as this beacon for understanding for folks. And, I think about, you know, stories like daytime soap operas.
Yeah,
And like I'm sure you've Caribbean family, so I'm sorry, someone in your family watched their stories.
1000%.
And how daytime dramas evolved over the years, having, the first gay couples, the
Yeah,
interracial marriages,
right,
sexual assault, and
right.
and all of that was so important for people to kind of get it through their heads that
Yeah,
people are just living. And
yeah,
yes, their experience is going to be grounded in difference because of the color of their skin or their sexual identity, but it doesn't mean they're any less people.
yeah,
They're regular folks that you go to work with. They're your regular folks that you go to the coffee shop with.
yeah.
And it's so necessary to keep telling these stories so it becomes real. Like, I was reading something that, part of the challenge that I think of why we're sort of weirdly in the moment we're in is because, in the 90s, you had Fresh Prince, you had Family
Yeah,
Matters, you had all these shows that were around Black families that were on mainstream TV.
right.
And that didn't happen in the early 2010s.
Mm-hmm.
And as a
That's so
result of
true.
that, you've got another generation of people who didn't see our humanity, didn't see our
Mm-hmm.
nuances. And as a result of that, when you have a generation who doesn't see that, you get to
Yeah,
the point where like, oh, it's all about me, 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 me. Versus,
right.
oh, there are all these different unique experiences that different people can have. And I saw it on my TV screens where it sort of like got sucked into my brain and though I understood it.
Totally. I think that's a really astute observation. It's definitely connected.
Yeah, it's wild. And I'm just so glad that you're doing what you're doing. Because I think at this moment, it's just necessary. It's why people, a lot of people, like half people didn't understand Super Bowl, but we did.
Right, right.
Oh, we
It's like,
understood.
right? We watched the same thing, but people took away very different things.
As again, the more nuanced stories that we get, the more diverse stories we get, the better off we're all going to be.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think like it is so important to remember, like, we haven't even talked about like the business case, right? The idea that
Hey.
like we are leaving a lot of money on the table when we're not telling the full sort of diversity of stories that exist in our country and in our world. Like those are, a lot of times I would joke when I was at my previous company that I have seen in a movie or a television show literally every life circumstance that can befall a white character from the cradle to the grave. So if you are looking to tell fresh, original stories, you're going to have to start expanding the perspective and the aperture of whose stories you're telling. Those are going to be stories that feel fresh and original and new, not just to those audiences, but to all audiences, because we haven't seen so many of these stories still. That's where the new, fresh, original content is going to come from. That's where the future franchises might be. That's where the next generation of IP is likely to come from if we're willing to invest in it.
Yeah, just make them willing investment. Black Panther is still top 10
Yes.
grossing movie of all time. I
Hmm.
wasn't just black people who saw that movie.
Yes. 1000%. 1000.
I saw the trailer for Sinners, the new
Yes.
Michael B. Jordan, Ryan Coogler movie. It's a vampire movie, but it's a
Mhm.
whole new way of telling a vampire story.
1000%. 1000%. It just like you can reinvent so many genres. You can invite, new and lapsed audiences. You can serve people something that feels fresh and exciting and original. And we can get beyond the idea that, a story has to be about a white character in order for it to be for everyone. A story can be about a character that is not white and still be for everyone.
Yeah, and I think that's a big difference. Like it can be for everyone.
Yeah.
put on your TV. I think there's what two streamers are gonna have. I think with Viola Davis and Angela Bassett as president of the United States.
Yes.
I'm like, yes, thank you.
Yes,
Because
exactly.
there was this story about how like the show 24,
Mm.
because there was a black president,
Yeah,
before Obama became president, that like again made it okay to see.
totally. Like we could picture that all of a sudden, right? It's like you need to sort of see it to believe that it's possible.
And oh, like people read books and they can think about like, yeah, but there is something about when you see something, it leaves a visceral picture in your mind.
1000%. Yeah,
And then it just
absolutely.
becomes normal. Um,
Yeah.
so you've done all this amazing work, but I'm sure the road to get there has not been easy. So talk to me
Mm-mm.
about a time when you're like, there's no way I'm getting through this, and then you did.
Yesterday. It's one of those things that I really feel like when it comes to your career, when it comes to my career, like you always have to kind of take the long view. So I remember, like, just even at the start of my career. So I had graduated from college. I went to Harvard undergrad. I did a bunch of internships in entertainment because I always had heard and knew it's who you know, right? If you're trying to get into this type of field and you don't have family that have worked in it or friends that have worked in it, like you have to be like networking your butt off. And so coming out of college, I wanted to work at a record label. And I was sending my resume like everywhere. I was responding and applying to every single job online. And I felt like I was just going into an abyss. I wasn't getting a phone call back. I wasn't getting any interest. I wasn't getting an interview. It was just like crickets, right? And you really start to doubt yourself. And you're like, I thought I was prepared. I thought I had something to offer, like, but I can't even get the first door to open. And I remembered at the time that Clive Davis had gone to Harvard Law School. And at the time, he was like one of the biggest music moguls, in the industry. Worked with and discovered Aretha Franklin and Whitney Houston, and that at that time, Alicia Keys, and just was like everywhere. And I was like, I don't know this man, but I'm just going to see if he is listed on the alumni directory online. And he was, and he seemed to have his home address there. And I just wrote this man a letter and said, I've been following you in your career. I want to do a version of what you did. I want to be a mogul too. I think I may have even said that in my letter, in my like 21-year-old naivete. And I would love to work for you in any capacity. And totally unexpected. Like a couple weeks later, I got a call from the HR department at J Records and was like, Mr. Davis got your letter. We'd love to interview you for some of our assistant positions. And that's how I got my very first job, like real full-time job in the music industry. And I tell that story just because throughout my career, there have been a number of moments when it felt like I'm not getting to the level, I'm not breaking through to the next level. I don't know how I'm going to get there. And you start to have those questions of like, am I not good enough? Am I not trying hard enough? And a lot of times, what it is that you have to think about the problem differently and be unafraid to be super duper bold. My mom would always tell me, like, the only thing they can do is say no, right?
Right.
You always put yourself out there. And a friend of mine, her dad would always say, and no is just the start of negotiations. No is not even like a final answer, right? You always continue to push and find a window and find a window. So whether it was how I first got into my first job at a record label, to like how I got my first job when I moved out to LA after business school, where again, I didn't have really many connections in TV or film. I was going to be, kind of pretty much starting over because as someone who's coming out with an MBA, if you're like, no, but I want to work on the creative side, I don't just want to go into like the business strategy team or do finance. They're like, great, you can start over with our college, like with our recent college grads and figuring out a way to like make a way out of no way. It's just constantly thinking like, how can I think about this differently? How can I think about my network in the most expansive way possible, including people that I haven't met yet, but that I have some form of overlap with, and just shoot your shot constantly. And, that is something that I feel like has served me really well throughout my career.
That's amazing. I can't believe you wrote him a letter.
Listen, It was back in this. So people now are like, oh, she's old because she didn't send him an email. But I did. He had email and so did I, but like it wasn't really, I was like, I'm writing him a letter. I am mailing it because an email could go to an assistant,
And
right? Who
it's
never reads it.
in the ether. But like if it goes to his house, either he or an assistant is going to pick it up. I'm like, who the hell's sending me a letter? Okay, let me take a look.
Yeah.
But again, this is reason number 10,765 and why I love doing this series because like we just figure it out.
Just figure it out. Yeah.
Um, and the ways that we do it are just so incredible. That's amazing. I love it. Um, so you're building this new company, uh,
Yeah.
and you're venturing into entrepreneurship, but also wife and mom. So
Mhm.
what do you do for yourself? Like, what do you do for your self-care?
Mm, a good question. So I will be honest, I definitely need to be better at that. But I think about like the things that refresh me are spending time with my friends, spending time with my family, and having just little pockets of like indulgence. So like I'm a person, for instance, that's like I'm a big foodie. And so if I have a like, a work dinner or lunch coming up, like if there's a restaurant I've wanted to try, like I will incorporate it in that way and I will order something fun. Or like I keep a list of like hotels I want to visit and, try to do like a little staycation with my husband or with my like family or, just incorporating little pockets of joy. I'd always thought that burnout was like a theoretical concept that didn't apply to me because I've always felt like an energizer bunny and always had energy. And I finally did hit a wall a few years ago where I was like, oh my God, I feel like I'm experiencing burnout. I didn't recognize myself. I was like, why don't I have motivation? I'm lazy now. I don't feel like doing stuff. Everybody's annoying me. And I was talking to my therapist and she was like, you're experiencing burnout.
Mm,
And what I had to do was like, I took a step back and I looked at my life. And I was like, for so long before I started working in roles that had, DEI embedded, I'd always done, my job inclusively. I'd always advocated for underrepresented communities and for underrepresented employees, but it was not my main job. And that actually made a difference, right? So I had all these extracurriculars that were like all focused on inclusion and access and equity. I had some of the extracurriculars that I did at work, whether it was ERGs or, you know, multicultural marketing plans, but like I always had at that time, like some main job that was my job that gave me sort of an escape and a retreat from thinking about and working on addressing like racism and exclusion like 24/7. But at that particular time, because I had a job that was focused on that, and I also had a life of extracurriculars that was focused on that, I was just exhausted. And I
mhm.
had to kind of like realize I was like, I'm really tapping myself out now. And I was like, I re-engaged with some of the hobbies that I used to really love when I was in my early 20s. I went to dance class when I lived in New York. I went to Broadway dance. I was like, let me find a studio out here to just go do like a couple choreography classes at and like get my mind off of it. Or let me like, do like a 1 day, retreat with my best friend to like just think about life. Like somewhere just for a Saturday where I don't think about the problems that I'm working on at work. I stepped away from some of the boards that I was working on because I was like, this problem is such a huge part of my day-to-day work now. I can't make it also the thing that I do every weekend too. And so having to find like that balance like was really important. And I think just sort of listening to your body and listening to those cues and those clues of like I'm hitting a wall and finding a way to like revitalize yourself because I knew I didn't want to walk away from the work. I knew I didn't want to stop having a very full, busy life, but I needed to do it in a way that was going to be more sustainable.
I think that's so necessary for folks to understand that, like, you can schedule yourself for death because
Hmm.
you're trying to do all the right things.
Yeah.
Then, of course, what ends up happening, you burn yourself out.
Yeah.
And I think this is a big thing with Black women, especially, where, like, this whole we have to be Superwoman universe.
Yeah.
And I often say, we are not from Krypton.
Right.
So there is no universe where we need to be superwomen at all. We live on Earth. There is nothing that's going. We have no superpowers. and we will get tired. We will get
Yeah.
exhausted. And it's so important that whatever self-care it is, there is something, whatever it may be,
Hmm.
making something for yourself because you cannot survive in this world without taking care of yourself. It is the oxygen
Hmm.
mask first.
Yeah,
Otherwise, no one gets helped. Uh,
totally.
if you're not breathing, even you can't help anyone else breathe, no matter how much we think that we can.
Hmm.
That's
No,
not
it's very
how
true. No, it's very true. I think that Black women, women in general, but Black women absolutely tend to carry the weight of the world on our shoulders. And you see some of the receipts and some of the outcomes of that when it comes to sort of like how many diseases that are primarily caused by stress are overrepresented amongst like Black women. Everything from heart disease to lupus to, other things. Like I just had a friend that passed away, family friend that passed away from lupus a month ago. And I'm just reflecting a lot on the ways that as women and as Black women, like we have to take care of ourselves because this world will absolutely burn you out and leave you with like nothing. And all of the problems that we're working on will persist. So we have to
exactly.
balance.
So it's not worth it to do all that, and you have nothing to show but illness and
Mhm.
sickness, and
Yeah.
we just, as hard as it is for a lot of us, we like to take a step back. Nope, and,
Yeah.
and find those things. So, do you have a give and or an ask of the audience?
Hmm. Let's see. A give. I guess the thing I would offer, I think that there are a lot of people right now because of the moment that we're in, just sort of nationally, politically, socially, culturally. People are feeling depleted. And I want people to know that it's okay to acknowledge the chaos around us. And also, it is imperative that we like remain hopeful because if we don't have hope, then we will not fight back. And I think that like we are in a moment where like the hopelessness is one of the biggest threats that I see in the moment right now. People are really losing hope. And I would encourage and offer people a reminder that hope is a discipline and like we don't just practice it when it's easy, we have to practice it when it's hard. And I guess an ask that I would make is connected to that, which is again, I was at a retreat this past weekend and I heard so many things that really reignited and reaffirmed me. It was a gathering of folks in entertainment and the arts that are also like activists at heart and want to respond to this moment. And one of the folks that spoke said, if you know someone who was deeply engaged politically, socially, culturally, last year that has kind of tapped out because they've been so depleted by what's happening, please go and encourage them to tap back in. So I'm here to encourage people that are probably still feeling tired and frustrated and probably a little bit fearful about what we're seeing to please tap back in. We really need to be on the front lines and on the field with what is happening right now and making sure that we are not just sort of letting it happen because nothing is inevitable unless we decide that we are no longer going to try to work towards something better.
I love that. And I think it's absolutely necessary. And whatever tapping back in looks like for you, that's
Yeah,
okay too. But
absolutely.
there's no set playbook for any of this, but like, eyes on the future, and find those ways to tap back in are so, so very important. So thank you for saying that. 'Cause I think a lot of folks are, still got the whiplash from the last
Yeah,
few.
absolutely. Absolutely. Which is totally normal. Like we're not machines. Like I was a part of the rest is resistance and like listening to the nap ministry for the first time and just being like, I am so tired. And like I right? I feel like
Same.
many of us are there, and the onslaught is real, and overwhelm is part of the strategy. They want us to be too overwhelmed to do anything. And so we have to be aware of that and take care of ourselves, but also recognize that like it is time to tap back in whatever way you can.
Whatever way you can. And speaking of tapping back in,
Hmm.
last question for you. What's one thing that brings you joy?
Yeah. One thing that brings me joy, I would say probably right now the easy answer is my son. I have a well, probably almost 7.5-year-old now, Langston, who's in second grade. And he is just like he's such a ball of joy. We're really lucky. He's such a happy, pleasant, joyful kid. He's got so many big opinions. He is like, at the age where like he's picking up on different colloquialisms and things like that. So like his new one last week was like, in my opinion, blah, 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 which was just so funny to hear from a 7-year-old. And so it's like nice to be reminded of all the things that we just say, like as a matter of course, that he's learning for the first time. Like this morning, we were listening to a song about capital cities, and he said that like he thought what capital city meant was like it was the only city that had a capital letter at the beginning. And I like lost it. I was laughing so hard. But I was like, why would you know that? He was like, I didn't know what it meant to be a capital city. I thought they just had a capital letter. And I was like, honey, every city has a capital letter. It's like the place where the government is. He's like, oh. And it's just really fun to be reminded that like they are such blank canvases. There's so many, he's like super smart. And yet there's so many things that he just has no idea about. And it's really fun.
Absolutely adorable and delightfully wonderful, and a wonderful way to end the podcast. Well, you've just been amazing.
Thank you, Laura. This is such an awesome like forum that you've created. I'm jealous of your ability to have all the conversations. I can't wait to listen to them. It's cool.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I think, your openness and wisdom about the world we're in right now, especially from the storytelling perspective, is so necessary and needed right now. I think folks need to just hear it,
Yeah.
because we're hearing all the opposite of that, like that we can't talk about these sorts of things, so we can't share our stories. Like, nope, actually, right now,
Yeah.
like, more than ever. So we'll put all the details in the show notes about all the fun things you're up to, and for you folks to connect with you. And thank you, my darling, for being part of 29 Days of Magic.
Thank you. I'm so excited about it.
Thanks. And that is our show.